Hi everyone, this is Navika Chada, cloud engineer and a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional in Azure. I warmly welcome each one of you to the 25th episode of Tech Chat with Navika, wherein today we would be diving into the Azure Container Solutions, for which we have an expert with us today, Lionel. Lionel is a Microsoft MVP, MCD, and a cloud DevOps architect with over 15 years of extensive work experience in the IT industry. He has achieved over 80 technical certifications and have authored hundreds of blog posts related to cloud, DevOps, and FinOps. Lionel has been consistently contributing to the tech community with his valuable insights and technical content. Thank you so much, Lionel, for joining me in today.
Thank you very much, Navika. I'm very happy to be here with you today.
Thank you so much. Likewise. I'm super excited for the podcast today. So, without any further ado, I'm quickly getting started.
Yeah.
Um, you know, um, as a couple of minutes I mentioned back that we're going to be talking about as Azure Container Solutions. But before we actually get into the specifics of it, I think to set the stage, if you can just give a very high level overview of what Azure Container Solution is all about in general and what purpose does it solves in the modern application development.
Yeah, so I will start with giving you the different solutions that you can use in Microsoft Azure for your containerized applications. So it will streamline your DevOps processes. Basically, you have the three most famous ones, which are ACI, ACA, and AKS services for Azure Container Instance if you want to run a basic container. Azure Container Apps if you want to have orchestrations, and AKS, Azure Kubernetes Service, if you want to manage your full clusters. But there are even more options in Azure. It's like a big box of Legos. You can do so many things. You can also have your own Red Hat OpenShift cluster in Azure. It's called Arrow. If you want a complete platform, completely managed and supported. And you have other services that also can be seen as containers because you can run them with Docker files. I think about Azure Functions or Azure Web Apps. So as you can see, there are like many services you can use in Microsoft Azure for all your containerized applications.
Yeah, thank you so much for the comprehensive overview. And now, as you just mentioned about the services like ACI,
Mhm.
AKS, etc., I think now that we have a little bit, general overview of what Azure Container Solutions is all about, I think it's good time if you can just walk us through the different type of Azure Container Solutions that are
Mhm.
offered, which you already did. But if you can just, explain each one of those along with the use cases of it, which gives a better understanding to the audience in
Mhm.
general.
Yeah, sure, but we can start with the easiest one, which is Azure Function, maybe. So it's a function as a service. It's perfect for specific use cases like just like sending an emails for
Hmm.
event-driven applications, starting a backup, database cleanup. So it's perfect into serverless architecture, and it's quite an easy service if you want to start with containers. And then we can move to Azure App Service, which is kind of the same because you can deploy code or a Docker file. So it can be seen also as a container solution. So it's a complete managed PaaS service. And in my opinion, it's perfect for web application use cases like web apps and web APIs. Then we can move to ACI, Azure Container Instance. It's the easiest way, in my opinion, to deploy a container in Azure. So you will basically pull an image and deploy it through ACI. You can have either public or private applications, and it's really cost effective. So it's perfect if you want to start with containers in Azure. And the use cases would be simple application, automation, CI/CD pipelines, or short-life jobs. But you won't have a lot of advanced features. So probably you will have to move to ACA, Azure Container App, where you will have orchestration. It's important to notice that with ACA, sorry, you will have only Linux containers. You can't have Windows containers. So it's a PaaS service that basically runs on top of AKS, and you will have advanced features with ACI. You will have revisions, certificates, custom domains, ingress, scaling with tools like Kida, and you will have also tools to develop microservices with Dapper. So use cases, as I told you, are microservices, event-driven applications, web applications, and API endpoints. And then we can move to AKS, the most famous one, I would say, because you are going to have an IaaS service. You will manage the full cluster, except the control plane. The control plane will be completely managed, but you will have to manage your worker nodes. The best thing is that you will have access to the Kubernetes API, so you will be able to implement it as a platform if you want. You will have a lot of flexibility, a lot of granularity. You will be able to configure a private or a public cluster. There are many tools for security, and you can integrate your AKS clusters with many services in Microsoft Azure. And the use cases, obviously, are microservices, cloud-native applications, machine learning model training also, and data streaming scenario. And what good thing with AKS, in my opinion, is that there is a new feature that it's called AKS Automatic. And basically with AKS Automatic, you will have an AKS cluster production ready. So all the security will be prepared for you. The network configuration, the scaling will be managed for you. And you will even have schedule upgrades and image cleaner processes. And yeah, the last option, as I told you, is Azure Red Hat OpenShift. So it's a little bit bigger than just an AKS cluster, because here you will have a complete platform. So it may be more expensive, but you will have full support from Red Hat and Microsoft, and many features that you won't have maybe with AKS. Same thing, you can have public and private clusters, automated operations, over-the-air platform upgrades, and so on. And the use cases would be kind of the same as AKS, so microservices and cloud-native applications, edge computing applications also, and DevOps.
Right, right. That was really insightful, and thank you for explaining the use cases along with the differentiation as well. That was really helpful. But as you mentioned, like AKS is one of the most used services from the Azure Container Solutions, as you just mentioned. So I am picking up that for the next question as a separate question altogether. How do you think that Azure Kubernetes Service helps us simplifying the entire process of managing and deploying applications in a cloud native environment?
That's a good question. As I told you before, first of all, the control plane is completely managed, so that will remove a lot of time for your teams, because when I say the control plane is managed, I'm talking about upgrades, patching, scaling. Everything is managed for you, so you have more time to be focused on your applications. Also, you can easily integrate your AKS cluster with many things in Azure, and that's definitely a game changer, because you are going to integrate your AKS cluster, for instance, with Microsoft Entra and configure role-based access control. You will have many services to be linked with your AKS clusters, like a key vault, using workload identities through Service Connector. You will also be able to scale your AKS cluster easily, either horizontally or vertically. So you can add replicas to your pods, or you can just adjust your nodes. And also, you can have better operations because AKS also can be linked with observability tools like Azure Monitor and log analytics. So you can have metrics, log aggregations, analytics for your teams to find easily any issues with your applications. And finally, I think that's quite important, if you build a platform through AKS, you can also implement GitOps for a declarative approach to deploy your applications.
Thank you for that explanation. And I think because AKS is getting integrated with so many Azure services, I think that makes it one of the most used tool as well, for sure. Now, as we're talking about the integration of AKS, you did mention that how can we integrate with the Microsoft Intra ID, and then from the performance front, etc., etc. But if we talk about AKS integration with another Azure container solution, that is Azure Container Instance. So, how do you think that ACI and AKS sort of complement each other? So, if you would like to give any real world example or any use case of that.
Yeah, that's a great question, Navika. And I have seen this a few times. You can integrate AKS with ACI for specific use cases. As I told you before, you can scale your AKS cluster horizontally or vertically, but it takes times. You will have, for instance, to increase the number of nodes, and it won't be like very fast. And one use case you can think about is maybe you have an application that need to scale quickly and have a burst capacity. And for this, you can rely on something called virtual nodes in AKS, which basically allows you to deploy pods into ACI for specific use cases. So it will be really fast. So that's the first good point. And most importantly, it will be very cost effective because you won't have to pay for a full node. You will only pay for the vCPU or the memory consumed by your pod, because you're basically using ACI, and it's just completely integrated with your AKS cluster.
Got it. Thanks for the explanation. And I think now that we have understood a very high level overview of what Azure Container Solution is all about, and then we have dived into the different services that it offers, and post that along with the use cases, and then you have also covered how Azure Kubernetes services sort of integrates with other services, including ACI, and you just explained that as well in the last question. I think that we are in a very good position to take up the next and the last question of this podcast as we wrap up. That is, according to your experience, if you would like to suggest some best practices for optimizing the performance and the security of the Azure Container Solution in general. So if our viewers have some, containerized environments and they would like to apply the best practices to it, so what would that be? Because, as we have those what do you call those pillars that the environment should be supported by, which is like performance, security, cost optimization, all of this. So if you can just let us know some best practices for that.
So we can talk about performance first. I think that there are different things you can already do at the cluster level. For instance, as I told you many times, you can configure auto scaling. That's really important, also for cost effectiveness. But also, I think it's really important at the beginning when you create an AKS cluster is to choose the correct size for your nodes, not too large, not too small, and to choose the right storage type, because maybe SSD for production workloads can be interesting, but if you have multiple concurrent connections, you may go to a network-based storage solution. So the storage, the node size, and the auto scaling at the cluster level can be interesting for your performances. And at the application level, there are many things you can do. And the first thing that's in my mind is to configure requests and limits on your container definitions. That's the most important thing you may have to do before putting your application in AKS. And also implement liveness probes, because through probes, Kubernetes will restart your applications on its own, so it will be perfect for performance. And one last thing I have in mind, I think it's to think always about disaster recovery strategies. And maybe the first one is to configure your AKS cluster through infrastructure as code to be able to deploy it easily for testing, for upgrades, and so on. And upgrades can be also another option to have better performances. If we talk about security, same thing. You can act at different levels. We can start with maybe identity and permissions. Now there is a new feature called service connector to connect your services from your AKS or ACA to a key vault, for instance, without using passwords, because it's going to rely on OIDC protocol. So I would say that identity and permission could be the first thing you can do. You can also integrate AKS with Entra ID to configure role-based access control and use a least privilege approach for your customers. Also, avoid using secrets using managed identity instead of service principals. That's something that can be easily done. And at the cluster level, we can do also many things. We said before to update your cluster. That's something that you have to consider to implement an upgrade strategy in your company. Use Azure Key Vault for secrets, for certificates. Remove vulnerable images and scan your images that you run on your cluster. So you can use many solutions, but in Microsoft Azure, you can use, for instance, Microsoft Defender for containers, but there are other providers for such solutions if you're interested. In your pipelines, you can add a lot of different security strategies to check your code, for instance, the Terraform or your Bicep code before configuring your cluster, but also the code of your Docker files and images. And one thing I would definitely suggest is to implement Azure policies for your cluster, but also network policies to validate the network flow on your cluster. I have seen sometimes people configuring a public cluster, but you can definitely considering implementing a private cluster if you don't need to expose your applications to the internet. And one thing that something is missed by teams is to configure observability, because through observability you can see and configure alerts on different metrics, but you can also check automatically upgrades and how secured your images are. So you can use stuff like Grafana, Prometheus, or even Elasticsearch for such purpose.
Exactly. Thank you. That was so insightful. I think you've covered literally all the sub points for each of these categories of performance and security and cost. It comes to applying best practices, definitely the ones that you have mentioned. And on the top of it, I think it's important. It is like a continuous process. You have to continuously monitor, your Azure services in general, its performance, and then when it comes to cost optimization, keeping a monthly check on how much a particular Azure service is costing, and then accordingly taking your decisions according to the needs and requirement. So it is more of also it's a continuous process. You have to keep a constant check on how your infrastructure is performing in general, be it dev, QA, or prod, any environment, irrespective of that. Needless to say, you've literally covered all the points, and we appreciate it. And yes, that brings us to the end of the podcast, Lionel. And it was a pleasure having you. And
Thank you very much.
The entire podcast was so informative, educative, and insightful for me. And I'm sure it's going to be the same for the viewers as well. So thank you so much once again.
Pleasure.
So before we end this, if you would like to give any ending note.
Yes, thank you again, Navika. It was a pleasure to be here. And I just want to say that with AKS in particular, many features are just being released. And I think it's important for you guys to check regularly Azure updates, because many things arrived and many things are going to be published. So that's just the beginning. I think with AKS, we'll have many surprises in the upcoming months.
Absolutely. And anyone who wants to get started with this journey, I think Microsoft Learn is a very good platform wherein they can
Mhm.
just head over. You have a lot of learning paths and modules over there about the topics that we have discussed in this podcast and even in general. So, if someone who is not that much aware about Azure or want to get started with the journey in Azure, I would really recommend you guys to head over to Microsoft Learn, and you have plethora of learning paths over there, which can really aid you in getting started with your journey
Mhm.
in Azure. And even it's for professionals as well, someone who's already in the IT industry.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Lionel, once
Thank you.
again. Bye bye.
Bye bye.